What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I want to make a quick video about Henry Cejudo, a bit of a career retrospective, because last weekend he had what is presumably his retirement fight. Fingers crossed, I don't want to see him come back. But he's a very interesting case as a fighter, because it's a very mixed bag. On the one hand, he has an argument to being one of the greatest combat sports athletes of all time. He has an argument to being a top 20 GOAT in the sport of MMA. And if not top 20, like worst case scenario, top 30. And on the other hand, his title run, his like 2-division title run, is riddled with asterisks. And now his like post initial retirement return run here has just been a streak of 4 losses in a row against increasingly worse opponents. So it's like, what to make of this guy? Because the fans don't give him the respect I think he deserves, and that's largely because he's got that cringe persona, and then, yeah, you pair it with all the kind of goofy things I just listed. You know, people naturally don't want to give him the credit he deserves. But, again, like, he has an argument to being one of the greatest combat sports athletes of all time. He has a much stronger argument to that claim than does Alex Pereira. And I've had arguments with people like this. You know, I've made videos about Pereira. I've gotten in arguments in the comment section of those videos, but like, I don't care what Joe Rogan said. Being a multi-divisional champion in Glory or in K1 or in any professional kickboxing league doesn't hold a candle to being an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling. Okay, the level of competition is not even close. It's a much bigger talent pool you're competing against in the Olympics. It simply is. And furthermore, being a UFC world champion doesn't hold a candle to being an Olympic gold medalist. So like, so Henry being the youngest American to ever win a gold medal in wrestling, pretty fucking nuts. That's far more nuts than Pereira's Glory titles. It's far more nuts than either of their 2-divisional titles in the UFC. Like, that's fucking insane. So the fact they did that, and he came to the UFC, and he became a double champ, and he defended the belts in both divisions, and they were 2 of the best divisions of the sport, especially the bantamweight one, speaks for a lot. But, again, asterisks surround that entire title run, because he loses to Demetrius Johnson. He's undefeated, he's young, he's relatively inexperienced, but he's looking good. He's beaten good guys like Formiga, and he's got the Olympic gold medal. So they put him in, you know, Johnson is in need of challengers. Cejudo is like 8-0 or 7-0 or something like that. They put him in with Johnson. He gets nuked. He gets finished with a knee to the body in the first round, gets embarrassed. After that, he has a questionable decision loss to Joseph Benavidez, and then he really has this technical turnaround where he really dials in and applies himself. He strikes me as the kind of guy who thought that compared to the Olympics, the UFC would be easy, that wrestling is such a powerful base for MMA that he wouldn't need to get that good at everything else. You know, he would just need to learn a bit of striking and he'd be good. And it was good enough to get him to the title, but it wasn't good enough to dethrone one of the greatest fighters of all time. Surprise, surprise. So he really applies himself. He dials in. He develops his game. He shifts from like a brawling Muay Thai guy who is a wrestler to more of this in and out 1-2 karate boxer wrestler hybrid. Very interesting style. And he puts together a great win streak. He beats guys like Sergio Pettis and Wilson Reyes. And he takes on Mighty Mouse in the rematch, and he wins. He wins a split decision. You know, it was controversial. Some people thought it was a robbery. I didn't think it was a robbery. When it went to the final bell, in my head I thought, okay, they're going to give it to Mighty Mouse. But I knew it was incredibly close, and I was fine with it going to Cejudo. You know, fights that close, I'm fine if it goes either way. And I like fights like that where both guys look so good that I kind of just don't care who wins. You know, it's kind of like when Dominic Cruz had that nip-tuck split decision win over TJ Dillashaw. It's like you both look exceptional. It could have gone either way. Like in my mind, this is effectively a win for both of you. Like on your resume, I kind of just look at it as a win for both guys. Because again, not only could it have gone either way, but you both looked like one of the greatest fighters I've ever seen in the fight together. So that's how I look at it. I can see my breath. It's fucking cold here. I'm living in Minnesota, and it's like below 0 out right now, and my garage heater only works so well, and I have to turn the heater off so that you can hear me while I record, so it's going to be fucking cold. Anyways, back on topic. So that's how he wins his bout. That's his first title win. It's a split decision over Mighty Mouse. They don't do a trilogy fight because the trade with Mighty Mouse and Ben Askren happens. Whatever. His first defense at flyweights against TJ Dillashaw, who at the time was totally the guy at bantamweight. He had won his belt back since losing it to Cruz. Cruz lost to Garbrandt, and then Dillashaw came in and took out Garbrandt twice. He looked amazing. But it was an extreme cut. This is where he gets popped for EPO. He claims it's the only time he used it. I'm skeptical. But in any case, he was clearly emaciated. The cut was very extreme. And what happens? He goes down, and Henry clips him very early and gets a kind of quick stoppage. It's very similar to Dillashaw's stoppage loss to John Dodson up at bantamweight. Kind of a flash knockdown, gets swarmed quick, and the ref calls it even though he's not out yet. But, so it's like a case where it's like the stoppage is a little early. This is probably a compromised version of Dillashaw. How much do you want to count that? I mean, it counts officially, of course, and it is a legitimate win. But, how strong does that name hold on the resume? That is for debate. And then what happens? Cejudo goes up to bantamweight. There's a vacant belt because Dillashaw was the champion. He did not vacate, but he got stripped because he popped for EPO after going down to fight Cejudo. So now there's a vacant belt. And Cejudo can say, look, I don't care if it's a vacant belt. I beat the guy who had the belt. I beat him at flyweight. And the only reason he doesn't have it now is because he popped. So, you can't hold it against me. This is for a vacant belt, and fair enough. But nevertheless, he didn't beat Dillashaw at bantamweight, so that's, again, an asterisk. And then he fights Moraes, who is not the champion, and that is an asterisk. And yes, Moraes was on a tear. This is when he had knocked out Sterling. He had knocked out Rivera. He was looking like quite the monster. And most people were picking him to beat Cejudo. And, Cejudo takes a ton of damage early on, but he grits down and he just gets in Moraes' face, and he ultimately finishes him. And yeah, Moraes goes on to lose a bunch after that, so the win ages very poorly. But there's something to be said for the fact that, you're the one who sent him down that path. You're the one who wrecked everything. You're the one who broke him. It's similar to, being Justin Gaethje and ending Tony Ferguson's win streak, or being TJ Dillashaw and ending Renan Barão's win streak. It's sure, that guy never looked the same after, but is that just because I got lucky at the time that I fought him, or is that because I beat him into looking not the same after, And in each case, there's going to be a stronger argument one way or the other. In Ferguson's case, I do think he was just getting old, but the beating probably didn't help. And so, all that's to say, Cejudo has a claim to that being a very good win. And then he fights Cruz, and Cruz was not the deserving challenger. He was given that on name value. But it's still Dominic Cruz, and he still had some very good wins late in his career. He had some good wins after that loss, so, it's still a good win. It's just, it's a better title defense than Renato Moicano is for Islam Makhachev, for example. But, the one, though, was a short notice replacement, and the other was made by design, though. So even that alone is going to, people naturally hold that against Cejudo a little bit more. It's sort of like Cruz winning against Dillashaw and then defending against Faber, and then at the time the considered undeserving Garbrandt, who he lost to. But it's like him doing that instead of rematching Dillashaw, for example. And that's it. He retires after that. He's defended both belts and he calls it a day. And at that point, it's a perfect ride off into the sunset moment. You get the benefit of leaving on top, the benefit that guys like Khabib and George St. Pierre had, and John Jones to a degree, where it's and Jones only really ruined it by ducking Tom for a year. If he just never fought Stipe, if he just beat Gon and was yeah, I'm done, fuck you guys, Jones would benefit much more strongly from leaving on top. But in any case, what happens is if you never see the guy get dethroned, you naturally have this bias of how much more could he do, and that weighs in their favor. Look at Merab. What if Merab never fought Peter Yan last week? And what if instead, what if he just retired? Or what if he died? What if he got injured in the training camp and he hurt his back and he could never fight again? And he just never got dethroned. He beat Sandhagen and that was it. He never fought again. And he just ended on this 13, 14 fight win streak, whatever it is. He would be like more highly considered in terms of all-time GOAT discussions than he will be now. Now, he could still turn that around. Like, maybe he wins a trilogy fight with Jan and defends the belt again. Like, who knows? But, like, as it sits, if he never wins the belt back, it'll hurt him that he lost to Jan. Whereas if he had just left on top, he would do better. That's just the bias we have. We naturally see the win streak. We see that it was never halted, and part of us thinks it never would have. It's like Lee Haney in bodybuilding. Lee Haney, for those of you who don't know, he has the record for most Mr. Olympia wins. He's tied with Ronnie Coleman. They both are ahead of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Phil Heath, who are tied for second. But Lee Haney has the claim that he never lost. He broke the record, he got 8, and then he retired. He didn't get dethroned like Ronnie Coleman did. Ronnie went for a 9th one and lost. And so there's something to be said there. Like, Haney will always be able to have that sort of shine of like, hey, he could have got 9. We don't know. Whereas we just know Ronnie couldn't. You see the difference? And it's the same thing here. It's like, if Merab just left after beating Sandhagen, you'd be like, he could have done more. Whereas now we just know he couldn't. And with Cejudo leaving on top, he gets that perk. He gets that same perk that has Khabib and GSP, and to a lesser degree, Jones. And so it seems like, in hindsight, it was just all a money play. It was just all him trying to leverage what he could against the UFC. He wanted bigger fights. He wanted this triple champ opportunity against Volkanovski. And it didn't really work out. He ultimately just comes back and fights for the bantamweight belt against Sterling, and he loses. And it's been downhill since then. It's been fighting worse competition, at least worse in terms of rankings. Ultimately, in hindsight, we'd probably say Dvalishvili was a harder opponent than Sterling was. But in any case, he fights Sterling and loses. He fights Dvalishvili and loses. He fights Song Yadong and loses. And now he fights Peyton Talbot and loses. And in each case, it's just looking worse and worse. And you'd expect it to, because if you just look at his age, he's like 38 right now. He was past his prime when he came back. Like, we missed his prime years. He was entering his prime in terms of his age and his skill development when he left. Like, he left kind of right as we would expect his peak to be, and he sat out a couple of years, came back older. And that's just what we've seen. Like, Jack Slack said it perfectly. Like, this fight against Peyton Talbot looked like what it was. It looked like an old flyweight fighting a young bantamweight, And surprise, surprise, he looked worse. He looked like shit. His wrestling, wasn't as reliable as it should have been. And his wrestling is a strange story, a part of this whole story anyways, because he didn't often use it as effectively as you'd think he would. Like, he did sometimes, like he did against Sergio Pettis, he did against Mighty Mouse in the rematch, but you got guys like MMA Guru just shitting on American wrestlers and shitting on him specifically for just not bringing his wrestling to bear the way like the guys from the Caucasus regions do. And there's truth to that. And I think with Cejudo, it's a weird case because he has the skills. And you even saw that against Talbot. Like, you saw against Talbot moments where he would get hurt and he would just like, it was almost like the DNA awoken in him. And like, and he just remembered he was a wrestler and he's like, I'm just going to like chain wrestle, And even stuff like Cormier called perfectly, where he goes for that lateral drop, kind of knowing he's not going to get it, but just knowing he'll win the scramble and get on top. It's like, that's the wrestler. And we don't see a lot of that from him because I don't know, he must have gotten in his head that either that'll be too tiring in sort of like a Justin Gaethje way, where he's like, look, wrestling matches are only a few minutes long. Like, I can't do that for 25 minutes. I don't know if it's a fatigue problem. I don't know if it's some bizarre, like, his idea of how to integrate wrestling into MMA is just more limited than it should be. I'm not sure what the cause is, but in any case, Cejudo is an elite wrestler, and that's kind of been lost in his 4 fights since his first retirement, because he gets out-wrestled by Sterling, and that's a combination of size, that's a combination of being old, that's a combination of Cejudo being better out in the open and Sterling being better against the fence, which is what you'd expect, taking an elite freestyle wrestler against an elite MMA wrestler. And then Dvalishvili's him, And that fight to me was just so clear. It was so clear that Cejudo was past it, because I'm not saying that prime Merab couldn't beat prime Cejudo, but Cejudo was knackered by like the second round, and the first round was not that high pace. And so it's like, there's just no fucking way that's the same guy that beat Demetrius Johnson in the rematch. Just go watch that fight. It's 5 rounds. Look at the wrestling. Look at the scrambling. Look at what Cejudo can do there. And tell me that fucking guy would be exhausted in round 2 against Merab. There's no fucking way. So, not to say that's like a completely bullshit win for Merab, but it's not as good as the name looks, okay? And then, yeah, he goes on to fight Sang Yadong. He looks okay, but he's ultimately losing, and then the eye poke happens, and then they do a technical decision, and he loses, and now he just gets beat up by Peyton Talbot. Now, he got to show grit against Peyton Talbot. You know, it was reminiscent of Luke Rockhold fighting Paul Acosta in that way. But, and don't get me wrong, part of me was like, whoa, what if he could pull this off? Because it made me think of the Marlon Moraes fight. Because Moraes, again, was piecing him up, beating the shit out of him, chopping his legs and everything. And Cejudo just bit down and said, I just need to get in this guy's face and just like spam him with right hands until he fucking breaks. And he did. And so part of me was like, what if Talbot, you know, uses a little too much energy trying to put Henry away? What if Henry just grits down and gets in his face and, you know, experience beats youth in that case? Like, what if he can do it? What if he can pull it off and get a late stoppage over Talbot? How great would that be? That'd be one of the most feel-good moments in the history of the sport. Sadly, didn't go that way. It was more of a, you know, a moral victory and defeat than anything else. But it really just showed that he should retire. He should have been retired. The comeback never should have happened. It did nothing but hurt his legacy. I don't think it should hurt it that much because, in my mind, I mostly just care about, did you lose in your prime? And all of those losses are clearly post-prime, not to mention in his, like, not ideal division anyways. So, like, I'm not going to hold it against him much, but it naturally will. Just like leaving on top naturally biases people in your favor, ending on a big losing streak, even if it's post-prime, naturally biases people against you. It's the same thing Ferguson had to deal with, BJ Penn, guys like that. Like, it's just bad. It just leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth. It's what they remember most because it's what happened most recently. And fair or not fair, that's just how it's going to go. Like any hope Henry had of being like a top 20 GOAT, out the window, you know, for most people. So it's just a sad case. And who knows, like, Talbot looks very promising. You know, I see a lot of people kind of saying, like, hey, this guy, I wouldn't be shocked if this guy had, like, championship material or top contender material. And I think there's an argument there. So this could be a loss that, like, kind of ages well. And it could be similar to, like, when Chad Mendes lost to Alexander Volkanovski, because Mendes never got the belt, but in his rematch with Aldo, he looked sensational. You know, he looked championship level. Then there's a win against someone like Miles Jury or someone mixed in here, but basically what happens after that is he loses the decision against Aldo in this epic war. He takes a short notice fight with McGregor, out-wrestles him, fatigues, you know, and sure, that's also because McGregor worked his body like nobody's business, but fatigues, gets finished, has a fight with Frankie Edgar where he gets knocked out in the first round, and that was just like what the fuck, is your chin gone? Like, how did pillow-fisted Frankie Edgar knock you out in round one when even McGregor couldn't do that and Jose couldn't do that for 5 rounds? Like, what the fuck? And so there's a bit of a layoff then, and then he fights Volkanovski, and he does okay. You know, he gets some takedowns, lands some decent punches, but ultimately gets finished in like the second or third round against Volk. And he retires because at this time, Volk was just an up-and-comer. So it's like, yeah, you know, that's kind of like Cejudo getting beat up by Peyton Talbot. But of course, Volk goes on to be probably the best featherweight of all time and one of the greatest fighters of all time. So losing to him, especially when you're past your best, not a bad look, you know, and not even a sign necessarily that you need to retire. But in Henry's case, 4 in a row, 38 years old, at bantamweight, he needs to retire because there's nothing else. Like, sure, he could get, like, if he could get a ranked win, that would do very well for him in kind of a similar way that it did well for Figueiredo to get his win the other month. But, like, past that, there's no real hope. He's not going to be a top contender. He's not going to get his belt back. He's already a 2-divisional champion. He already defended both belts. Shy of just needing money, there's just no reason for him to fight anymore. And so that's basically all I got on him. I thought, you know, some people maybe didn't see his earlier career. They don't know the full story. They don't know why it's such a big deal to be an Olympic champion versus, say, like a fucking kickboxing champion. But I just wanted to talk about Henry Cejudo because he got his send-off. You know, they did the video package for him. But nevertheless, I feel like he's a guy who never quite got the credit he deserved. People didn't quite realize how insane what he did actually was. And yeah, that was due to a mix of, you know, asterisks surrounding certain wins, strange career choices that ultimately didn't work out, and then ending on a losing streak. Like that's and just having a personality that rubbed people the wrong way. But all that added up to him not getting the credit he deserved. And I figured since we're probably never seeing him again, he deserved a little video like this. So that's what I've got.